We've got Senator Daniel Webster with us, Peter Tebow. His name might be familiar to many of you. We've also got joining us Pam Bertolo from the Florida Virtual School. We've got Barbara Dreyer from the Connections Academy and Brewer Saxberg from K-12. So let's welcome all of our panelists. And to get things started, we're going to have a brief presentation. Do I need to hit that up there? You can do it for me? Great. While he's getting that started, just remind everyone to fill out your evaluations at the end of the session.
Leader Webster. When Tim Tebow was on the floor last week, Senator Wise thanked Senator Webster for his contribution to the Florida Heisman Trophy winner. We all smiled. But I wonder how many really understood the significance of those words of praise. You see, before Tim went to the University of Florida, he was educated by his parents at home. They were able to choose the option to homeschool because Florida passed a law in 1985 making home education legal, a bill that was sponsored in the House of Representatives by Daniel Webster. What's amazing about this bill is that Senator Webster sponsored the legislation as a member in the minority, way in the minority. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the entire Republican caucus in both the House and Senate could fit in a phone booth back then. Senator Webster was a Republican in a Democrat-controlled House, with a Democrat-controlled Senate, a Democrat Commissioner of Education, and a Democrat governor. So how did this young member in the minority get such a groundbreaking piece of legislation passed? It started with a couple of dedicated families who wanted to change the law. Very few people had even heard of the concept of homeschooling back then, including Representative Webster. There were no laws and statutes, no rules on the books, and the courts were mixed on their decisions, until one court issued an opinion that said home education was really a matter of public policy, and that the legislature needed to decide once and for all whether it was going to be legal. A few brave families led the charge to get a law passed. Two in particular, Gene Sullivan and a lawyer named Craig Dickinson, met with Representative Webster to present their case and to gain his support. Craig Dickinson and Senator Webster actually wrote the legislation that is framed before us today. The road to passage wasn't easy. There were those who wanted to prevent home education in Florida. And in fact, the education chair at the time, Representative Walter Young, filed an opposing bill. By the way, Senator Webster, Representative Young was my principal in junior high school. To add to the challenge, the concept was so new and so foreign that it was met with a great deal of skepticism. In fact, the typical response from most members, both Democrat and Republican, was, why in the world would we want to do that? But Webster pressed on. During the process, there was one pivotal hearing. Families with their homeschooled children lined the front row of the committee. As the chairman flipped through the appearance cards, he suddenly stopped. He put the cards down and announced that he was not going to choose from the people who volunteered to speak in favor of the bill, but he was going to pick people randomly from the audience to testify. He pointed to an unsuspecting skinny kid on the front row who was only about 11 years old. The boy nervously made his way up to the podium. Taking a deep breath to compose himself, he gulped hard, pulled the microphone down to his level, and he said, "Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I want you to know my future is in your hands." When he finished, the committee gave him a standing ovation, and needless to say, they passed the bill. Eventually, Chairman Young combined his bill with Representative Webster's. At the same time, the Senate version was working its way through the process, sponsored by Senator Dick Langley and Senator Karen Thurman. Through a lot of hard work and earnest advocating, the bill passed both chambers. However, Webster's work was far from done. Governor Graham was being lobbied pretty hard by then Education Commissioner Ralph Turlington to veto the bill, and Governor Graham indicated he was probably going to do just that. Days went by and the veto clock ticked. Finally, the last day for the governor to act came. Governor Graham had until midnight to make his final decision. The ever-strategic Dan Webster didn't visit Governor Graham on the bill, but instead he sent two Democrats, Craig Dickinson, the author of the bill, and Dr. Larry Walker, a professor at the University of Florida, who was homeschooling his two children because they had severe illnesses. The advocates talked and talked with hopes of turning the governor, but they left with no assurances. A few hours later, Governor Graham made his decision, and he didn't just let it go without his signature. He took the extra step to allow it to become law with his signature. That fall, Daniel Webster started homeschooling his children. I love this story because it points to the tenacity, the strategic mind, and the unwavering spirit of Daniel Webster. He is always thinking outside of the box, always breaking new ground, always finding a way to get the impossible done. On behalf of the Florida Senate, we want to present to you Senator Webster with your marquee bill, the Home Education Program Act.
Senator Webster did not know we were going to play that presentation at the beginning, but I figured it was a fit introduction to someone who has served the state of Florida for 28 years and just this year served his last. So with that, I turn it over to Senator Webster.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you for allowing me to be here, and thank you all for coming. We have a state which actually started then with the first menu item on a big menu menu of educational choices. Some of the things they said there I was going to say, but maybe I'll make it a little more. Hopefully, I can make it somewhat interesting. In 1983, those two people were mentioned, June Sullivan and Craig Dickinson, came to see me, but what wasn't said was they said they wanted to home educate their children and homeschool their children. I go, what is it? I mean, what are you talking about? I don't know what home education is. So they began to explain it to me and wanted to know if I'd file a bill for them. And I said, sure. Do you have a bill? No, not yet, but we kind of know what we'd like to do. Okay, so we talked about it, and I said, I'll file it. I'll do it. I'll do everything I can to pass it. So, as was said, we filed the legislation, and it began moving its way through. But as he said, Walt Young had filed the Department of Education's version, which was, the Department of Education shall promulgate rules to regulate home education. What that meant was, the interpretation of that meant was, there would be no home education. We had several ways of meeting the compulsory attendance law at the time. One was public school. Two was parochial schools. 3 private schools. 4 religious schools. And 5 were tutors. That was it. And so there was sort of this disagreement among the community of people that would like to home educate whether or not they should actually be in the statute. So I remember after we came forward with our agreement, myself and Craig and June all went in a room with the chairman of the committees in the House and Senate, the staff of the House and Senate, and then the people from the agency. Department at the time it was Health and Rehabilitative Services. Department of Education had their deputy secretary there, and some others, all interested parties. So I allowed June Sullivan to tell her story. She had 6 daughters, all in elementary school, all at the same time. She was president of the PTA. One of her daughters, I think it was her 3rd born daughter, made no progress for an entire year. She was in 3rd grade. And so I stopped her. I said to the deputy secretary, what did they do? And he said, they passed her. Sure enough, that's what happened. So I said, how about if we say, if home educators don't progress with a progression commensurate with ability, then they don't home educate anymore. They get a year to make it up. If they don't make it up, then they're out. And we could have a portfolio that the superintendent could look at any time to look at their work on demand, and that they would have to take one of several standardized tests or be evaluated by a public school teacher in that particular grade level. And that's the way we decided to do it. Everybody at that table agreed that was what we would do. And it was solely based on the testimony of June Sullivan that the public schools would not want to be under that same light, and that the teacher would be basically evaluated on the on how their students progress. If they don't progress, they don't get to teach. That's what would happen to a home education mom or dad. If they don't progress, they have to quit. Because at the time, the courts, as was said, had some mixed decisions. On 2 occasions, they made the kids go back to public school. One occasion, they allowed them to continue because the person was a certified teacher, and the other was when they said, look, it's really the state legislature's got to make the policy. So I didn't have much hope of the bill passing. However, I did file it, and we moved it through the committee, and it seemed like as things went on, we were able to explain. Even the members of my caucus, which was the small caucus that it was, asked questions like, what about socialization? What are you going to do with that? I go, well, which drug dealer are you talking about? Well, not that. We're talking about other people. I said, well, you know, socialization may not be all that it is or cracked up to be. And what about their career? And what about all these other questions? And that'll be answered later by Peter when he comes up. But, you know, I thought then that if there's that kind of resistance, and that's the only resistance, it's probably a good idea. So it was a miracle. Passed the House and Senate. The objections were pushed aside. People were willing to do it. But you know who objected the most? Were some of the home educating moms and dads. They were afraid if we put something in the statute, then they're going to shut us down. They're going to do us in. That same debate happened, that's within a year or two of us doing what we did, happened in California. Some of the people in home education here wanted to do one thing, and that is stay under umbrella schools. So there's a school, it kind of gets established. We don't really regulate private schools or religious schools here. So you operate under that. That's what they wanted to do. Or they wanted to go to the United States Supreme Court and get a ruling that would be favorable. I said, well, the second option, you can try that. It'll probably cost you several $100,000 to do it, and maybe by the time your kids are graduating from college, you'll have gained a decision in your favor. Maybe. The other way is you can try that, but you're going to, at some point in time, the court is going to say, wait a minute, this is tutoring. Because California, right now, has the exact law that we had in 1984 when we were getting ready to file this piece of legislation in 1985. They had the exact same requirements, the exact same necessary exceptions to meeting the public attendance, required attendance laws, compulsory attendance. They chose to go in another way. They went the umbrella school way. And now we know, 20 years later, what happens when you do that. I predicted it would be in 10, but okay, so it took 20. But it happened. We decided to make a 6th way to meet the compulsory attendance laws in Florida, and that was by home educating and keeping the portfolio and doing the some sort of evaluation at the end of the year. And it was the right thing to do. You know, I thought about how just here recently the editor of the Law Journal at FSU Law School is home educated, top student at FSU. Valedictorian at University of Florida, spelling bees and geography bees and all kinds of other things that have been where there have been competition. They're at the top. It's been so well accepted that after it passed in 1985, it continued on with different changes. The first one was giving the opportunity to apply for scholarships, the Florida Merit Scholars and other scholarships that came along later. Then there was the opening up of the Florida High School Athletic Association, which allows for any student, no matter who they are, to participate, whether they're Tim Tebow or somebody else. to participate in athletics, participate in band, participate in cheerleading, participate in a Latin club, whatever it is they want to participate in, they can do so under that law, public school or private school. And so that's been sort of the acceptance level. It's just grown and grown and grown as things began to ramp up, more people home educated, and the resistance, I think, went away because the performance was good. And so it sold itself after the first couple of years. Usually on most school districts' top agenda in 1986 and 7 and 8 and 9 was eliminate home education. But after that, that was gone, and they never showed up again. They gave, I don't know if they gave up, they just decided it wasn't worth the battle, and it wasn't worth the comparison, because the comparison turned out to be good. I mean, in that the students did not show any kind of problems. They could make it all the way through, and then we opened up dual enrollment in the community colleges, so you could dual enroll while you were homeschooling. And then we opened up other scholarships that came along later. So for that, I think it's been a successful program. It's been a successful idea. It's been a successful option. Is home education for everybody? No, because it's hard to do. I remember Ralph Turlington, who was the Commissioner of Education at the time, brought me in his office and he said, you can't take schooling home. So he didn't want to call it schooling. He wanted to call it, and so it's the Home Education Act. He didn't want to call it schooling. He says, you can't take schooling home. You can't set a desk up and teach a child for 6 hours in the middle of your living room. You can't do that. It's impossible. So it's not education. You can't take schooling there and do it. So how do you expect to do it? I go, just watch. And he said, plus, I think it's just a Mickey Mouse operation. So I remember, you know, they have these little portfolio things after the law passed. And on the front of one of them was a Mickey Mouse portfolio. And so I gave that to him just to remind him that it's not. So as I thought about it, how Ralph lobbied, he was sending in notes at the last day of session, which is when it passed. Don't pass this, don't pass this. Then he told Governor Graham, don't sign this, don't sign this, don't sign this. So the governor, on the last day that he had to either sign or veto the bill, he calls me up and says, I'm vetoing the bill. And then that's when I got these two people just to go see him. Number one, they worked for him in a sense. Number two, they were his party. And after he heard what they had done already, they had already plowed the ground. Dr. Larry Walker and Craig Dickinson, who was a lawyer in Tallahassee, who worked for the DOT, both of them had plowed the ground, and they showed all of the results. And Governor Graham looked at it and said, it's a good idea, I'm going to do it. And he did. And for that, it worked. But that was only the start. We're going to hear about later virtual schools, but in between that, there was, we started charter schools, and then we expanded choice. We did first a state-run virtual school. Later we added private virtual schools, K-8. And then we also added vouchers. So you open up now this menu of options that you have, from private schools to religious schools to parochial schools to home schools to virtual schools to charter schools to voucher programs. We have an array of options that are just awesome. And now I think the next threshold is integrating those together, because homeschoolers are benefited by virtual school. Homeschoolers are benefited by working with the public schools in performing and doing athletics and arts and other things. And homeschoolers are public schools are benefited by interacting with people that may have a different perspective on education itself. So to me, I think we're just starting, And I'm hoping there's some constitutional amendment that's being put forward. That too will help give us the ability to expand our voucher program. But we're always looking for new ways and new ideas and new options, because to me, it may have started here, but it never ended there. It continued on, and that has just become one of the options we have available to us. And I think you're going to see, once this panel is done, you're going to see how diverse our education system is in this state. Yes, we have what we call seamless education. We want to have that so that you can go from whatever K-12 program you're in to either community college or some other thing, or to a graduate program, and there's this seamless picture that's drawn. However, within that seamless education, there are unbelievable options. And so I think we're going to see the success story here. Now I would introduce Peter Tebow, who's a graduate of the University of Florida, who participated in the dual enrollment program. He participated in athletics in high school, and he also went to one of our universities and became a graduate. So Peter, why don't you come and tell us about your experience?
It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. At first, I kind of questioned why they would want a young buck like me, who's fresh out of college, to share my experiences with you. But then I realized that it's because all the things that you have put in place that's why I was able to succeed. And I've never gotten to do this, and I don't think many homeschoolers have, but I would like to first say thank you, Senator Webster, for making this happen. My education, my career, and as it is it's what it is because of the way I was raised and the way I was educated. So thank you so much. My name is Peter Tebow, and if you recognize the last name, I am privileged to come from an amazing family. And you might have heard of my little brother. He plays football, and he's a good kid. And he is, which is a good thing. And I'm a little lesser known Tebow, but I was able to benefit from so many of these programs that you have. First of all, I was homeschooled throughout my first grade to 12th grade. And some people ask, about the socialization. They're like, well, and I always kind of look at them puzzled, because my siblings and I'd say we're too social at times. It's a bit much, just tone it down a little with the socialization. I think we did okay in that aspect. In the 9th and 10th grade, I was able to take a couple courses online through the Florida Virtual School because, frankly, my math skills were getting beyond my mother's math skills, and so we needed a way to still be able to educate me, and so I took some math courses at the Florida Virtual School. And one thing it allowed me to do is allowed me to study at my own pace. And while I am an avid procrastinator, when I really get to something, I love to jump in full speed without maybe some of the slowdowns that I've now experienced in the college classroom, such as these huge hours of time when you don't have anything to do. I was also able to play sports, and I didn't grow to be 6'3" and 240 pounds, and so you've never heard of me in the sports arena, but I loved athletics. Still do love athletics. I played football all throughout my senior year. I played baseball. I ran track my senior year. I played basketball until I stopped growing very tall. And but I loved to compete in sports, and still some of my friends to this day are the friends that I made at Trinity Christian Academy on the west side of Jacksonville, where I was able to play sports. And some homeschoolers don't get, maybe they don't get, you say, the opportunities. Well, I still went to the prom. Well, it was a Christian school, so it was a banquet. We didn't dance or anything like that. But I was able to participate in the normal activities that your public school and your private school kids get to do. And then my senior year of high school, I was able to do dual enrollment. And that was a great transition for me, coming from the classroom of 1 to the classroom of, 30 to 50 students at the community college level. And I was able to knock out some of my core math courses, so it could put me right on track to make it in the degree that I wanted in college. After that, I decided to go to community college in Jacksonville to be able to live close to home, to be able to save some money and work. And I love the community college experience. Some people at the University of Florida, they kind of look down their nose at community college, but I loved a place where they weren't really trying to fail me, and there was getting some good one-on-one education, with one-on-one time with my professors. After FCCJ, I enrolled at the University of Florida, frankly because it's the best university ever. Just kidding. But they have a great engineering program, and I started computer science. Or I started computer software engineering. I changed to computer science engineering. That's more of what I wanted to do. And May 2nd, 7:30 p.m., I graduated from the University of Florida with a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science Engineering, and that was exciting. And I managed to slip through with the lowest of honors, so that was cool. My mom liked that. And currently, it was pretty easy for me to get here because I'm doing an internship this summer here at Disney. And so I'm right in Team Disney building, and I'm working in the IT department, doing in the data warehousing center, working with their huge database that they have here, which is exciting. Or it's exciting to me. It's not exciting to everybody, which is understandable. And so this homeschool kid has benefited from all these programs, these laws that you passed. And my life is, I like to think that I could have gotten by in private school or public school. But I like to think that I am the person that I am today is because of the legislation that you passed, and because I was able to be educated by my parents, and along with all the school, learn a lot of other things, such as character, values, hard work, things that I'd say are almost more important than learning the traditional stuff. And so I'd like to thank you for having me, and that's it. Thanks so much.
We've got a few minutes if you have any questions for Senator Webster or for Peter Tebow. Open up to the audience. Anybody? Stunned silence. Careful if you put your hand up, Chantal. I'll call on you. Yeah. Uh-oh. One of our other universities represented. Okay, in the back here.
Hi, my name is Louise Smith, and I'm with Florida Child, and we give information and assistance about the Florida scholarship programs and educational options for parents. And my question to the panel is, what role or how important do you think legislation like VPK is to homeschoolers?
So that would probably be Senator Webster.
Well, I supported VPK, and I think it's a great idea. The earlier we intervene with a child from an educational standpoint, I think the better. That's been proven. I think it's fact. And so whether, what that has to do with home education is, I think probably Peter would testify that his mom didn't wait till he was 5 years old in order to start teaching him something about life and about reading and about other things. And I think it's the reason I supported it was because I saw what would happen when you worked early with a son or daughter in my own life. So I believe that that program is sort of a an extension of what we already knew, because home educators were doing that even before we had the VPK program.
Any more questions before we move on to the remainder of our panelists? Okay.
Okay, so next we have a presentation, right? by Pam Bertolo, who is the Chief Learning Officer of Florida Virtual School. It's a program that started in 1997. It's an awesome program. It's gotten awards all over the country. It's a state program, not a private program, virtual school, virtual high school. And Pam, why don't you come and present what you have?
Thank you, Senator Webster. It's definitely an honor and privilege to be here today. How many of you enjoyed the keynote at lunch? You know, I was asked to speak on the strategies for a successful virtual program and asked to do it in 15 minutes. And when I started planning, I said, oh, you know, 15 minutes, they'll give me a little time. But did you see what I saw at lunch today? This conference cut off 2 governors and a secretary. So I'm quite sure that my 15 minutes is a true 15 minutes. Florida Virtual School was born on December 6th, 1996. And that's the day that our president and CEO was hired as the co-principal for a small Break the Mold grant. From being a Break the Mold grant, we then became a line item. After the line item, we became part of the FEFP. And let me explain to you how that occurred so quickly and so well. It was because of the forward-thinking legislators in this state, and the governor, and the policymakers. Many of the people who were there at the beginning are here in this room today, and I have to tell you that Senator Webster was one of them. He won't tell you this, but I will. He and Governor Bush are 2 of the individuals, the only 2 people in the state of Florida who have actually won the most prestigious award that the United States Distance Learning Association gives out. And it's called the Eagle Award. And Senator Webster won it this year, so we're very proud of him. My point is that the very first strategy for a successful virtual program is having the forward-thinkingness, having a legislation that's not afraid to take risks, and one that's not afraid to say, why are we doing this? Why is that a policy? How can we get around that policy? So that's strategy 1. Strategy 2, stakeholders. Interesting thing that we learned along the way about stakeholders is that, of course, our stakeholders are our students. Of course, they're our parents, our teachers, administrators, schools, districts. And we went to those stakeholders and we asked them questions. And we went and we asked them to have buy-in. Huge strategy. And then what we learned later on, in this room today, we have some of the folks who work for Florida Virtual School who are public affairs liaisons. And what we learned later on, it took us a while to figure this out, is that everyone in the state of Florida was a stakeholder. So we actually have spent a great deal of time speaking with people who don't have children in the schools. Today I checked into the Contemporary, and the gentleman behind the desk said, what's this education conference about? I said, well, it's excellence in education and what we can do to bring excellence forward. And he said, boy, I wish they'd let me speak. I said, oh, do you have children? No, but I pay taxes. And I think that's a real important thing as you're going to build a virtual school to remember, is that stakeholders encompass your entire state. And then later on, perhaps the nation. The third strategy for a great virtual school is a special kind of leadership. When I started thinking about this, I started using the word strong leadership, but it's not strong leadership. It's something much more than strong leadership. There's a lot of strong leaders. It's something that I've decided to call humane leadership. Let me try and explain it. And at Florida Virtual School, we have a president and CEO who speaks like an expert and thinks like an amateur. Very different kind of person. You know, a few years ago I read a quote, something to the effect that experts built the Titanic and amateurs built the Ark. And that has been her basic way of being. Virtual schools don't need leaders with answers. They need leaders with questions. Because so many of us in education who have answers have old answers. We need people with real questions, people who aren't afraid to think like amateurs, and people who aren't afraid to ask more questions than they answer. It's a very different kind of leadership. In addition, in a virtual environment, have to have trusting leadership, have to have a culture of trust and risk. We have 700 employees. This room could be full of employees, and I wouldn't know it. We don't see our employees. And they do great things for students every day. And without that culture of risk-taking and that culture of trust built by a humane leadership, you can't have it. It's very different in the virtual world. And as you go back and start to think about building out programs like this for students, have to think about the people behind those programs and how to work with them in the 21st century. The next strategy is about your vision, mission, and your credo. Why in the world would you want to have an online program? It's not a job, it's a way of life. Why are you doing it? Who are you doing it for? What is it you believe in? If you can't answer those questions, there's no sense in going out and finding content and teachers. I don't think that there is a soul at Florida Virtual School, no matter what they do at Florida Virtual School, who doesn't know that our mission is to revolutionize education one student at a time, and that doesn't know that our single most important credo belief is that the student is at the center of every decision we make. So those are the first strategies. Then comes adaptability. In 1999, we were so proud of ourselves. We had gathered around this table, and we had just built out about our 40th course, and it was a marine biology course. And it had everything in it that we believed in. It had great pedagogy. It was engaging. It had a motif. It was cross-curricular. It was full of constructivism. It was built to the Sunshine State standards. I mean, it was a piece of work. Fast forward to this year. This year, we rebuilt a course, our American Government course, and we rebuilt it, and I'm telling you, we sat around a room again, and we looked at it, and it was full of Web 2.0 objects, and it was full of collaborative items, and boy, it sung, it danced, it was fabulous. Fast forward to yesterday, my house. 3 granddaughters visiting, ages 4, 6, and 8. Let me tell you about the day. Started out, had to go fishing. Came back, played some handheld video games. Then had to color. Then had to go play the Wii. Anybody have a Wii? Oh, yeah. Had to go play the Wii. Oh, yeah, and then we had to Google Hannah Montana about something. And then we had to go to the beach. And then we played a board game. Do you see how it went back and forth, from virtual to real to virtual, and the whole day blended together like that? That great marine biology course that we built, that beautiful American Government course that we just built, in no way will engage those 3 children. Have to be ready to adapt every year, have to be ready to adapt to what students need, because what today's high school students are engaged by, not those 3 girls. It's huge. You're never done. Constant, ongoing adaptability. Next strategy. At Florida Virtual School, hiring is the second most important thing we do. Whether it's a teacher, program assistant, a tech person. Why? Because if we're going to provide a different learning experience, we're going to need different people. We're going to need people who see that they are a member of a learning organization. Our CFO, we have two CFOs. One of our CFOs, George Latimer, was here with me today. And he was so excited because his team had spent the day yesterday figuring out ways to facilitate the rest of the staff more so that our teachers could spend more time with students. It's a learning organization. And our teachers, when our teachers come in, our teachers have to have a whole different way of thinking. Because it's not about a 9-to-5 job. If you're going to use the online environment and use it fully, you're not going to turn it on and off. After all, when do high school students wake up? Peter?
It's been a while.
Yeah. When do college kids wake up?
Not that early.
Mm-hmm.
About 11.
When do their brains start working? It's a very different way. And if that's when their brains are working, isn't that when we should be there for them? It's very different. So hiring is the second most important thing we do because we know this. Without these great teachers and great support network, the online environment isn't going to be a success. Brings me to the support network. In building a strategy for a successful virtual program, it's not just content, it's not just a learning management system, it's not just teachers. There's a whole support network behind that. Who's going to help a student when the upload doesn't work to upload a project? And when are those people going to be there? And who's going to help a homeschool student understand how to apply for college? And when are those people going to be there? So it's an entire support network. It's everything from counselors to tech support to what we call our customer loyalty department. Those are the people who answer over 2,000 phone questions a week. And it takes a lot more than a village online. It takes an entire support network. And then our next strategy is an induction system for all. Our induction system isn't just for our teachers, and it doesn't stop at induction. The majority of our teachers have worked for Florida, have been in the classroom about 12 years on average. And when they come to Florida Virtual School, they are a first-year teacher all over again. We bring them in, we do a great deal of training with them, as well as any staff who comes in, and we bring them back in, and they have a mentor for an entire year. And plus, in an online environment, because we are online, we can do constant and continual professional development. They pick up professional development any day of the week. We offer over 850 hours of professional development and a whole leadership track. So the induction is an ongoing program, induction into how to teach online and perhaps just how to teach for this century. And then, of course, the multifaceted gem called accountability. We are able to collect a great deal of data. In your handouts, I want to talk a little bit about accountability, because what is accountability in the online environment? What are we talking about? In the end, we're talking about student success. But how do we know that students are accountable? How do we know that teachers are accountable? How do we know what is really happening and what's really working? It was funny. A couple years after we got started, we got a call from TaxWatch. Now, if you're not from Florida, what you need to know about TaxWatch is Florida TaxWatch is usually known for searching out turkeys. Correct? And we got a call, and they wanted to find out just exactly what this online education thing was. Well, at the time, we didn't have that much data. We'd been in business just a couple of years. They came back to us 2 years ago. By then, we had plenty of data, and you have their full report in front of you. What I'm very proud about is that the data holds out. Our high-stakes tests, our kids are scoring better in high-stakes testing than other kids. Our students score as well or better in AP qualifying exams. And what's even more interesting to me is that when you look through that, you'll discover that the GPA of our students is about 2.4 on average. So we have the whole gamut of kids. And the accountability is right there in front of you. In addition, how do we know our students are working? How do we know our teachers are working? We're very proud of an entire accountability system that we've built, and that's in your other handout. And we actually have principals who we refer to as instructional leaders who go through and do walkthroughs, just like in classrooms, only virtually. We're looking at metrics every day, and what happened to us was years ago, Julie came home from Tallahassee, and Governor Bush had said, I think John Wynn too, had said, Julie, if you don't have data, it never happened. So I assure you that we are a data-driven organization. Excuse me. And then the final strategy is that in the online environment, the student is finally, definitely a customer and a volunteer. Now, we've said that in education before, but in the online environment, they're not a captive audience anymore. They're truly a volunteer. They're truly a customer. Students have choices in the online environment. They can't just sit and be compliant. They must perform. That's the final strategy I have to share with you today for building a virtual program. My parting shot, though, is that if we're going to build virtual programs, we need to build them so that they are future-proofed. We need to think about why we're doing it and for whom we're doing it. Because what we think of as the future will definitely become the past in a blink of an eye. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. One of the things that came to my mind when she was making her presentation was this school ran incognito for the first couple of years. I was presented in 1997 with a budget item that they wanted to put in. It was called Project Orange. It's kind of like code word, you know. Okay, what's Project Orange? Well, it's in your county. I go, okay, so I'm from Orange County. I got that. What does it do? Well, it's education enhancement program and a new way to look at education. Okay, so anyway, we talked about it. Nobody knew. We didn't want anybody to know. I think it was in '99 we actually named it Florida Virtual School and created a board of directors and kept Alachua and Orange on the board initially, and it went under the governor's office. But before that, it was codenamed Project Orange. So next we have Bror Saxberg, who is going to talk a little bit about the successful strategies around the nation. He is the Chief Learning Officer at K-12.
I'll need one technological moment here. Not bad. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how there are a variety of models around the nation that have worked, but I thought I'd first start by introducing a little bit about K-12, talk a little bit about how K-12 does a learning environment, because each of us do things a little bit differently, and then talk about some of the models and some of the policies that really match up with what students need to do. So K-12 began in 2000, and our whole approach was to think about technology, cognitive science, online and offline methodologies, and figure out how to improve student learning in various major subjects. And our whole economic model, all of us do this same thing, is to invest heavily up front in the development of learning environments that have many components that really define the educational experience that kids get and that teachers are involved in. And then we keep improving them over time. And that's a very unusual thing in the world of education, the way we're able to keep reinvesting and reinvesting over time, not just in the courses, but in the teacher support, the student support, the administrative support, and the physical materials as well. We ourselves get more than 1,000 pieces of feedback every month. We republish our whole curriculum every 2 weeks, and we make hundreds of changes to it per month. That's a really different model of how education materials and education environments can be evolved over time. Our focus is domestic. Most of our work is across the U.S. We've done some work in classrooms, a bit of international work, but most of our work is in the U.S. And we now have 40,000 kids across the country in publicly funded virtual schools. 100% of our K-8 content is material that's built or controlled by us, and more than 80% of our high school material is built or controlled by us. So we know a lot about this, just as our colleagues do. We build materials, we look at students' results directly, we train the teachers, we wrap all the way around these students. We run their learning environments completely, and we work in a wide variety of settings. In our settings, everyone is working virtually, all three of us. The students and the teachers, they're all working in various ways from home, on the road, with a lot of offline work actually being done by students as well. These environments are virtual, which doesn't mean purely online. You know, labs and art projects, science experiments and so forth involve substantial offline things. We've been academically successful. I'll show some slides on that. You have data from Florida Virtual. You'll see something from Connections as well. We've all shown that this really works with kids using standard measures of academic accomplishments. And we are demographically successful, all of us. We have a wide array of students. I'll show a bit about that, without the need for brick and mortar facilities, which are one of the challenges for all school systems. We're able to scale to as many students as our environment fits and as want to come in. One great example is the Florida Virtual Academy. We have almost 1,000 kids, 32% free and reduced lunch, 25% non-white, well-certified teachers, and we're turning kids away because of just limits here in this state. You know, we've had tens of thousands of families over these last set of years inquiring about virtual education. People want these options that Senator Webster and the legislators in your state have made available. So it's actually terrific to have all these options. And the performance has been good. This is math performance, Florida Virtual Academy. You can see the green bar is Florida Virtual Academy's math scores compared to the red bar, which is the state. So we've done very well with our kids. And returning students do even better. Kids who come back to us year after year do even better. We have even better results in reading than we do in math, and even science results, which is a real challenge for many kids. We do great with. Our elementary school kids just do wonderfully with our science program. So just as you'll have heard with Florida Virtual, just as you've heard from Connections, we've shown academically this stuff really works for kids for whom it's a fit, and it's not a fit for everyone. Great parent satisfaction results as well, and you'll hear that from all three of us. Our families like what they're experiencing. None of them are forced to do this. They like what they're experiencing. And we're in all kinds of models across the country. We're in more than 20 states. They range from charter school models, such as in Ohio and other states. We even have in some states, because of the rules, a whole network of charter schools. In California, a charter school can only serve contiguous counties. What an interesting concept for a virtual school. Why does it matter who's next to you? But so be it. So we have a network of charter schools in California to serve that state. We also have programs we do directly with some school districts. In Lawrence, Kansas is a district that has a program where they're using our materials and they serve that whole state. That works fine. Florida Virtual has been a pilot program within the state. That's worked actually fine as well. We've had several states that have done things as either federal or state-funded pilot programs. Just like Texas is another pilot program. It's done in conjunction with a charter school. So there are many ways that these virtual environments can actually be brought into states. And, you know, all of us are experienced and creative with ways of doing that. Every state is its own puzzle. There's lots of ways to do it. When you look at the different structures, they're all strengths and weaknesses. District-sponsored results, you can get some higher variability because everyone's doing it differently throughout the state, but it allows some real entrepreneurship and some variability in the models that the state can then learn from, so pros and cons. When it's state-sponsored, you get the advantage of a more central model, which is nice and controlled for everyone, especially for families that are moving around within the state. But sometimes districts get a little upset about the loss of control, so you have to manage that within your state. There's a political element around that, and of course the funding issues then between the district and the state can be acute in those cases. And you can have third parties that do things where they, outside of the standard structure, they are charter sponsors or provide funding directly. And those, you know, again, your mileage may vary depending on their ability to oversee what they've got their hands on. But again, that can reduce some of the political friction if all the parties agree that university is a good neutral choice to actually run education. So there are many structures for how this can be done, and they have pros and cons to think through. In addition, just the basic policies in a state vary and actually can be very important for framing success for a virtual environment. And there's a number of best practices that are now known. Florida has some of the best policies in the nation. You guys have been doing it a very long time, so it's been terrific. NACOL, the North Atlantic Council on Online Learning, is an organization that's begun pulling together a variety of best practices in virtual education. NACOL.org is the website for those of you who are looking for resources. And they have resources and standards for online teaching. They've also got some standards on policies and such, and I've actually drawn out a couple of things from that NACOL work because that's been done by a consortium of folks together. The kinds of things that are very important to make online programs successful include really setting up a specific statewide vision for online education and then supporting it and frankly celebrating it, as I think you folks in Florida do. You know, you guys celebrate the success of Florida Virtual and should. It's been a real model for all the rest of us coming after because these folks have actually, you know, broken the way for many of the rest of us. And the statewide support of that is actually really important. And you know, the online vision for education includes deciding, hopefully, on both full-time and supplemental uses of programs. It's very important to look for quality curriculum aligned with your state standards, not to leave that open, and to focus on successful student outcomes. You know, programs like ours, we're very proud of our outcomes, and so you should be looking for those and asking for those. There are going to be inconsistencies. Some of the policies around seat time and attendance are very strange. It turns out, in loco parentis, what schools are supposed to do, sometimes people get confused whether being at home is a good enough in loco parentis. Right? And, you know, one of the states I know of requires our families to send in sick notices to the state bureaucracy when the children are sick. And it's a bit odd. I mean, wouldn't you send them home if they were at school? I mean, what are they doing with the note? That's okay. So think about the inconsistencies and try to fix them. That's a key point here. And then provide sufficient resources, not just for quality, not just for the wide array of students, because there will be a wide array of students from special needs all the way up to gifted, but don't forget about innovation. Innovation is not inexpensive, so funds for that within a state are actually important too. Try some different things. At base, you've got to have clear oversight, and good programs welcome that clarity and can actually help you because we believe we do very well. We're happy to share all of our expertise in how we monitor and can suggest how, you know, really good ideas for this. And especially for online authorizers to make sure they have clear guidelines about what they're supposed to be doing and that those authorizers then require their programs to keep data, generate data, provide transparency around things. Because all of us should be proud of what we're doing. Data is key. I mean, especially, you know, in the new world, no child left behind, sure. But even more than that, all of us are able to gather and benefit from tremendous amounts of data that a standard school is not able to keep. We see details of results and success and assignments and grading, and even the messages between teachers and students are actually accessible to us for review. So there's tremendous amounts of data about attendance and participation and performance. There's a lot of data about teachers, not just their status, but what they're actually doing, how they communicate, how often they do it, are they meeting instructional needs and so forth. And finally, a wide variety of program data, you know, surveys of families to see if we're meeting their needs, as well as the actual learning effectiveness and performance outcomes. And then finally, online programs have a way of highlighting other issues that are just hidden by the standard educational system. So for example, should funding be based on educational attainment or seat time? What is the focus of the education funding in a state? Is it the daycare aspect, which is seat time, or is it the educational outcome aspect, which should be the, you know, the education piece? In a brick and mortar institution, the two are conflated, so it's not so important to figure it out. In a virtual environment, well, you know, kids accelerating, kids slowing down, how should funding work in those environments? And it plays back to the brick and mortar environment. Progression for students, same kind of thing. Social promotion, number of months, or when you're done. You know, how fast, how slow. And then that enhanced use of data that we have available to us, but perhaps should be available elsewhere as well. Finally, you guys do not have to start from scratch. Any of you who are not from Florida already, because Florida's, well, I mean, you guys are very far along, but other states, if you're thinking about this, there are already quality standards. Come to Florida, see what they're doing. Other states have other standards. There are groups like NACOL, there are experienced folks like us who've worked in all different states, all different types of environments who can help you with this. You don't have to start from scratch, but if you implement and improve the best practices that are out there, the students will benefit. And you'll get things like stories like what I just received, you know, recently, just last year, on a blog that I have at k12.com. This is from a family. This is a mom writing about her daughter and her own experience with the K-12 curriculum. She wrote this: "When she sees my tears as I teach about the Holocaust, when she herself gets indignant to see Hitler walking by the Eiffel Tower, these things are alive to her, and not a set of dates and facts to memorize, but a whole new way of understanding the world and a hunger for more. In K through 8, our kids' two favorite subjects are science and social studies, because of how we bring them alive and really how the families can bring these things alive." Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Saxberg. And now we have Barbara Dreyer, who is president of Connections, and she's going to talk about successful physical models around the country in virtual school.
We've had really an exciting time, I think, hearing about how wonderful virtual education is, so I'm the cold shower, because I'm going to be talking about some fiscal realities. And before I get into that, since I think I got the short straw somehow, just to get myself cheered up, I am going to say a few positive things about what have happened with us at Connections Academy. We also operate full-time virtual school programs in 14 states around the country. We last year served on average about 10,000 students, which we thought about it in course enrollments is about 110,000 courses. And of course, part of why we use this imagery is just because while many of us think online, and certainly in the high school grades in particular, much of the content is going to be appropriate to be delivered via the computer, just as you heard earlier, there's a lot of things that go on offline as well, particularly for our younger students. Florida has been a leader in accountability, and so we're particularly proud also of our FCAT scores, which just came out. In our case, the blue bar is the Florida Connections Academy scores versus the state. We also have a significant portion of minority students, as well as a very large free and reduced population that mirrors the entire state average. In the case of our reading scores, we had an increase in every grade except for one, where we had a very slight 1% decrease, and obviously we're going to look into that. But in math, we actually have exceeded the state in every grade, and in some cases, we actually had double-digit increases in a few of our grades. So we're very proud of these scores. We also are very concerned about parent satisfaction, because as important as it is to produce the academic results, it's particularly important for the students to feel positive. And so one of the things we're most proud about is that 96% of our families believe also that their children are making good progress, and 91% are enjoying the program. You know, you have to have a couple of kids who are going to complain about it. I think that's still fantastic results. One of the challenges when we talk about funding is that there isn't one form of virtual education. In fact, you see a couple of them represented here today. You have full-time, whole school replacement programs that literally include extracurricular activities, field trips, physical science supplies that actually have to be shipped to the home. It is the equivalent of having a complete school for your student at home. But you also have supplemental programs which may be providing one course, maybe even enabling some of the students to take some of that instruction at the school. You have programs that have mixed media, have online, have physical textbooks, have physical novels, science kits, again, things that have to actually be shipped out. And you also have more intensive services. For example, you may actually have guidance counselors for all of your high school students, or you may have a program which simply represents, I give you a password, you go online, and now I can get you started right away. You've got homegrown programs where there may be kind of an anything goes approach. Maybe it's developed by local staff who haven't particularly been trained in online education or what it is to be virtual, let alone what intellectual property rights are. Or you may actually have professional course writers who are spending months under very strict guidelines to develop their content. Sometimes you have a part-time teacher who really acts as a facilitator. In other words, they might just have some email exchanges, but they are not really actively involved in this instruction. You can actually go to another extreme where you've got teachers who are providing synchronous lessons to their students and who are very involved both in phone, even in person, as well as electronic means. Some programs are only partially aligned in a very general way to what might be considered national norms. There's not really such thing as a national standard, but just kind of a national average, let's just say. You also have programs that have been very carefully aligned to the state standards. That's what produces the kind of results that I think you've seen all three of us talk about, is when you can do that. And of course, you've got some where the results are measured by detailed teacher assessments, pre and post measurements of learning, proctored standardized tests, and you have other content where it may just be, as long as you go through and you complete a sequence of lessons, that counts as giving you a course. And our legislators, our regulators are faced with this entire spectrum as if they're one thing, and they're not. And that's part of the challenge. So what we see is huge variability in terms of how states fund virtual education. But I have to point out, we have huge variability in how states fund education, period. So I think it would actually be kind of surprising if we saw virtual education operating differently. But it does vary widely to everything from above $7,000 a student in Pennsylvania to Florida, which is under $5,000, and despite all the results that you've seen, and in our own case, Florida Connections Academy started out as a C school, it moved to a B, it became an A school. That didn't come without a significant investment. They cut our funding. Now, it's a really tough budget time in Florida, but you didn't see general schools cut in anywhere near the fashion they got their growth cut. We actually were cut from $5,200 down to $4,800 per student. It's very tough times. And part of the reason is that states have very different requirements. Within the variability of funding, they also don't necessarily agree in how the money should be spent. There are some states that dictate that you must provide a computer for every student who's enrolled. Other states say, well, it can be for a household. Some states say, I don't really care what you do. What I care about is the form of instruction, but I'm not going to dictate to you that you actually have to provide a physical computer. Some states not only mandate that you have a printer, they actually mandate that you have to send out all the replacement ink cartridges. In some cases, they mandate an internet subsidy. In California, they mandate a particular student-teacher ratio that's based on the district in which you're authorized. In Nevada and South Carolina, they're now starting to mandate specific frequency of teacher contact, and in some cases even the form of the contact. In Ohio, you have to document that your student is actually working on a daily basis, or that student has to be withdrawn. And in some states, the teachers are mandated to be part of the state pension plan or have other types of restrictions in terms of how they're paid. Now, in some cases, these standards can be very positive. Certainly, I think very few people would think that a student should remain in a program and be funding if they're not doing any work. On the other hand, some of the dictates, such as the student-teacher ratio, bear no resemblance at all to anything that's actually been associated with results. If you require that students all receive an internet subsidy when 80 to 90% of them already are paying for their internet connection anyway, you're simply transferring funds that have no relevance to that family in terms of their access. It does not necessarily associate better academic results. Another big myth that's out there, and it comes up all the time, is virtual schooling has got to be, and I put less expensive to be a little more politically correct. Generally, it's like, it's got to be cheaper. It's got to be, you know, something that just can be done in a very casual way. In Wisconsin, which currently funds at around $6,000 per student, they tried to cut the funding to $2,500. Why? Because in some cases, there were a few school districts who were doing it for that. They didn't have any academic results. In fact, it was pretty pitiful. But instead of looking to how much does it cost to produce good academic outcomes, it was, well, if somebody can do it for this, then everybody should be able to do it for that. And this is something that is a drumbeat over and over and over again, that this should be some type of really inexpensive form of education. And yet the data shows otherwise. The Legislative Office of Educational Oversight in Ohio, which was no friend to virtual schooling, back in 2003, and obviously funding levels have increased significantly in Ohio since then, said that they even couldn't argue with the fact that the spending at that time, which was about $5,400, was actually pretty much a minimum that was required in order to deliver, the standards that the state expected. Another study was actually done in 2006. It's a very detailed study, Auchenblick, Palick, Bell South, hopefully I said that right. But basically it studied programs and said oftentimes they range from $7,200 to $8,300 if you're really doing it as a full-time virtual program. And one thing that I think should be enlightening is look at colleges and universities. Colleges and universities are not making, able to make these huge profit centers. Put the mega for-profits to the side for the moment. Think about when a college or university puts up an online course, what they always find is that it costs them the same amount as to deliver, particularly when it counts for the course development, as when they were doing one of their classrooms. You already heard reference to the Tax Watch study on Florida Virtual. And Florida Virtual's funding is kind of complicated. There's all kinds of different ways of measuring it. So I think it's fair to say it's somewhere between $5,600 and $6,200, depending on which categories you count. But it clearly was cost effective, and as you heard, it produces superior results. So the bottom line is that quality virtual schools cost as much to operate as comparable bricks and mortar, but there's an important but. And actually, I was talking with Representative Bates from my own home state of Maryland earlier today, and we were commenting on the fact that we're building schools now that cost 30, 40, 50, sometimes $80 million. And it's just sort of being done like that's the only way in which it can be done, is to continue to build out facilities. There is a massive cost of debt, bond debt, to build all this infrastructure that if you really factored all the costs of education in, what you would find is that virtual education can be a real bargain and often is shown to be at least 25% less. But what that requires is some scale. In other words, if you just dribble it out, you're never really going to get the savings. You actually have to allow significant numbers of students to attend this program. In Pennsylvania now, there are over 13,000 students who attend virtual schools. And there is a war going on right now between the school districts and the virtual school providers because they're saying you're giving them too much money. It's taking too much money away from us. But ultimately, if you're going to believe that virtual education should be part of the landscape, you have to allow that market force to exist and then adjust accordingly. So in sort of a summary, what should funding be? Well, clearly, funding is not going to be the same by state, but it certainly should be sufficient, and different states have different teacher salary schedules, different regulatory requirements. That's why they have different funding levels on education overall. But it should be sufficient to produce academic results, and that's based on what the providers who are getting academic results are spending, not what some program off to the side has managed to do. So in almost every case, what has been shown is it needs to be equivalent to bricks and mortar. The funding also preferably should be non-restrictive in the sense that these spending directives, like you must provide a computer, well, wouldn't you be better off maybe providing remediation services? We serve a very high minority population in Pennsylvania, which dictates that we provide a computer to every student. Well, we'd like to bring those kids physically into some learning centers, and we can only provide so much of that because we're being mandated to spend all this money on technology. And the reason is, fundamentally, they don't trust that the virtual schools are going to spend it on education. But if you then take the final point, which is you should have schools that then are either audited, reviewed, some way to ensure that you really are having student participation, that the eligibility is correct, and most important, that the results are correct. In other words, focus on the accountability as opposed to trying to fund at the lowest common denominator and get rid of the programs that don't work. Of course, that's a concept that is, you know, one could argue should be applied to all of education. That's going to be a very tough one, and certainly we've been facing it a lot over the past years, just with No Child Left Behind. But at least with the virtual programs, let them work based on their merits. The last point is, when comparisons are being done between virtual school costs and bricks and mortar schools, one of the things that's really hard, and if any of you get involved in this, you're going to face it at some point, is the cost of curriculum in a traditional bricks and mortar school versus the cost of curriculum in a virtual school program. Curriculum defined in a bricks and mortar school is usually your textbooks and your workbooks and the physical things that you buy. Well, you know what, on a per student basis, it's really low. Why? Because you only buy your textbooks every couple of years. Then you've got your teachers running around copying everything, you know, so you've got a whole bunch of costs that are sitting in the office supplies category that you're not even really accounting for. But where's your real cost of curriculum? It's because all of the teachers are making up their lesson plans every day. They're reinventing how you're going to teach simplifying fractions all across classrooms. Everybody is doing it their own kind of way. All right, so you're spending a ton of money on curriculum. It's just that it's labeled teacher salaries. So in our world, we can actually have a teacher-student ratio that is higher because they're spending their time doing different kinds of tasks. They are not having to write all that curriculum, and as you heard earlier, that curriculum isn't constant. It's continually evolving based on real-time feedback on student performance. You can't do that in the same kind of way. But what did it require? It required massive amounts of upfront investment. Florida Virtual has had to have huge amounts of upfront, as have both of our organizations. And you know, much of the rest of industry has dealt with this long, long ago. We have had big capital investments that then produce, over time, a more consistent quality product, a better product. What do we do in education? We still have the equivalent of kind of the old craft guilds, where it's every single person, lots of variability, and that's where we're putting our money. We're not putting it into an investment and then leveraging those returns. But if you are going to do an investment like that, you have to have some way to ultimately recapture those costs. But we would maintain it's a good investment, and I think what we would also say is that this is a real opportunity for public-private partnerships, where you can take the investments that we're willing to make, you can take the investments that some governments have been willing to make, as with Florida Virtual, and now actually begin to leverage that for results for everybody. So even though I'm feeling kind of down at the moment after going through that, I will end on an optimistic note, which is to say, when we first started, which is we're going into our 7th school year now, a lot of the conversation was about, does this work? It was an efficacy discussion, and there was great skepticism that this could really produce results. And I know even Florida Virtual, who's longer than this, still for a long time had to face those. Those questions are over. For the most part, that's not the argument. The argument now has shifted into that we can't afford it, we don't want homeschool kids to have access to it, it's taking money for districts, but at least now we're into the how can we pay for it part of the discussion. And you know what? That's fine. It's a practical world. It is about the money in the end. So let's at least hope that those of you who are interested in this and what it can do for the kids will sort of have the stomach for the funding battle. So thank you very much.
Do we have any questions for our panelists? All right.
Actually, my name is Robert Dow, and I'm the incoming CTA president and the union president for Palm Beach County, Florida. And I want to say I admire virtual schools and the whole idea of virtual schools. I just want a couple of informational questions. First, are there major in-district attempts to create their own virtual schools that actually would kind of be in competition with you? That's one question. And I mean around the country. I'd like to know what you know about around the country. And the second question is, when you test your students, and I see the really nice high test scores and all that kind of stuff, are they tested with the exact same tests, like you were mentioning the FCAT, are they taking the exact same tests that the public school kids are taking?
Can we take it first? And then
Go ahead.
Pam, you want to? Don't you worry.
We have a Florida virtual school father right there. No, but let me answer. Let me answer from a Florida perspective, and then my colleagues will give you a national perspective. Palm Beach County currently has a Florida virtual school franchise. So in your county right now, you actually have a district-run virtual school. Okay. So they can talk a little bit more about what else is going on out there. The other thing that a bill just got signed, I believe, Monday, and that's Bill 1906. That's the one I want to talk about. Can you speak to that better than I can? No. Okay. I'll start. But Bill 1906 is, I'm looking around to see who's in the room. Are you familiar with it? The bill, okay. What it is, it's a bill that will allow students, I believe it will start in career academies, and it will allow students to take an exam. And basically what we would have called it when I was in school was clepping, but I think we're going to call it slepping. Will allow students throughout the districts to take an exam, so, and it'll be the same statewide exam. I saw somebody from the DOE in here earlier, but I think she's gone. So you're going to see that start. I think we're probably going to see that as a new wave in Florida. Statewide assessments are eventually going to come our way. And then finally, to answer your other question, as far as high stakes testing, the comparisons that you're seeing with our students are in the high stakes testing, so it's all the same FCAT, for example. Now, I think it's real important. What's interesting is that our online courses are built to the Sunshine State standards. So those exams, so if a student, for example, is signed up for a course, those students are all going to have the same final exam. And then now that's not true, as you know. That's not true currently in brick and mortar schools throughout the state. Does that help?
Throughout the state, but it's getting more.
Yes, yes. You might want to speak to that.
So nationally here, if I don't choke myself, good. So nationally, on the test score one, that's a very simple question, which is, yes, those are all given in proctored conditions. They're all using exactly the same assessments that are used by the brick and mortar kids. This is all No Child Left Behind compliant. All of that is regulated. One of the funnest tasks all our schools have is getting kids who can be far away from testing centers to testing centers. There are stories of snowshoes in Colorado I won't bore you with. The in-district virtual schools, there's actually a wide variety of local efforts to create virtual content and bring them up. Often a district will buy a license for Blackboard and then have the teachers sit down and begin typing and dragging pictures in, and off they go. The difficulty is most districts go through kind of an evolution where they start that way and then discover that the kids and many educators and families feel like something's missing from there. And then they begin looking around at organizations like ours, because all three of us have centralized professional development groups. We, for example, have cognitive scientists on staff who actually summarize the research literature, train the development teams, which include teachers and curriculum specialists and editors and flash designers. And we can do things at a scale that a school district just simply can't do. But we often do find, as we are talking to school districts, they have some of their own efforts, and depending on their own success with that, you know, they may be wishing for other things. So they're all across the country, and they're statewide efforts as well that are done custom from the ground up, as well as local district efforts. Go ahead.
Okay, another point I want to make, in Florida in particular, not only is it the same FCAP, but it's actually done in the local public schools. By law, you have to go to your resident school district to sign there, so it's even proctored by the same people who are proctoring the other kids. So that at least is a level playing field. Brewer mentioned it, but the problem with the district is scale. For most of the school districts, the number of kids who really benefit by this type of program is not significant enough to justify the investment to actually serve them. I mean, that's the challenge, and that's why it's so difficult. And believe me, I empathize with the school district from the standpoint, when they lose a student, their fixed costs don't change. In fact, a lot of their variable costs don't necessarily change because the number of kids is not enough to say, okay, I'm going to cut a teacher in a particular school. They might be spread across the district. That's the problem we have to figure out how to solve, because what you will see a bit now of is districts starting to join together in groups that are large enough to create scale, but even then it's hard. You're talking of tens of millions of dollars. In this case, I think you public have said $100 million. We've spent over $30 million. You guys have spent tens of millions of dollars. Most districts are not going to have that kind of capital investment. So on the positive side of things, you're starting now to see all of us develop programs, and Florida just passed House Bill 7067 that will allow school districts then to have more of a direct role in contracting to provide those services. So at least then they will have some opportunity to control the delivery of the services to those students. For the most part, with maybe the notable exception of one district in Pennsylvania, which started a school called Pennsylvania Cyber School, most of the district programs have actually been sort of the poster children for problems, I mean, to be blunt about it. And I think the main reason is it's been really small districts who want to be really entrepreneurial. They don't have the investment that can actually build a program that can be fully accountable. They're not trying to create problems, they just don't have the scale. So what we have to figure out, I think, is some way to recognize that the districts, I think, are increasingly saying these are our kids. We're seeing them go to other programs. We need to have some place at the table. We can't be completely disconnected from this equation, but we have to do it in such a way that recognizes that it should be to a certain standard of quality.
Very impressive. I have one quick follow-up.
I'm sorry, sir. We are out of time, and you are welcome to speak with the panelists afterwards.
Is you guys in the union?
Okay. All right. Which he is, hence his question. I'd like to thank our panelists for a wonderful presentation. And remind everyone, we will have a reception in the Fantasia lobby this evening at 6 o'clock, and you are free until then. And please turn in your evaluation forms to Kara in the back. She has her hand up, waving at you.